Welcome, my name is Tisha, co-owner of So Creative Lounge, and in this video we're going to learn how to make binding and add it to our quilt. So now your quilt is finished. It's completely sandwiched together. You have your quilt top, you have the batting inside and the backing. Now it's time to add the binding. You see that? This is what binding is. It adds a layer of color and finishing to your quilt by keeping all three of these layers together. Now you can't see the batting because it's already inside, okay? But you can see the quilt top, rather the table runner. You can see the top and the backing, and the binding you can see on both sides, okay? So today we're going to talk about binding, different size of binding, and how to apply it to your quilt. But this is a great example of one. All right, so let's set that aside and let me bring over my binding that I'm going to be using. Now you can purchase bias tape. I recommend the extended wide because you know it's going to fit the loft of your quilt. Now if you find that that's too wide, then you can always get smaller bias tape. So just find one that works for you, but I tend to gravitate to the extra wide the most. That's if you want the pre-made kits. The only thing about the pre-made kits is that they come in standard colors, right? So they're limited by color and choices. However, my quilt is a scrappy, exploding heart, and I want it to have the scrappy look. So I went ahead and cut my bias for my binding 3 inches wide and folded in half. So in total, once it's folded, it's 1.5 inches wide. Once you fold it, again, it's 3 inches, and then I folded in half, and I folded the wrong side and the inside, so you're looking at the right side. And I like this kind of binding technique. It's already pre-folded for you. Also, to want the backing of the quilt, and then flip it over and top stitch it in place. Some people will hand do this work, but it's really up to you. For me, I like to do as much as I possibly can on the sewing machine when I can. So it's really up to you how wide you want your binding to be. I like mine really wide, I like it thick, and I like to know that it's going to completely cover the back and the front of my quilt, and I really like that. So I took all of the leftover fabrics that I had, and as you can see, I just went ahead and made really a long strip. You may want to measure your quilt ahead of time so you'll know how much to make, and I just sewed those strips together, just joining them. You see that? Just joining them. And as I get to the ends, I can just cut the bulk down, just leaving 1/4 inch on there. Some people tend to open up these joint seams. I do not. I just press it to one side, and I'm kind of happy with that. It's that scrappy quilt. It's okay. And then I roll it up onto a old board so that it's easy for me to manage and not get tangled in the process of sewing the binding to the quilt. Now that this is ready, I'm just going to trim off this part here. I always like to start, at least give myself 5 to 6 inches of workspace, meaning this part is not connected to the binding, to the quilt, okay? And I'm just going to put a clip there so it's easy for me. And I am just going to unwind some of this, just a little, so I can get this started, so you can see how we're going to apply the binding to the quilt, okay? So once you have all your binding pre-made or packaged and sewn together, now it's time for us to take the binding, and we're going to take the raw edge, not the folded edge, and pin it to the raw edge of the quilt. So here's my quilt, and as you can see, I have a clip here, and this is where I want to start. If you notice, I'm starting somewhere in the middle, not in the corner. You never want to start in the corner. Here's my label here. So you never want to start in the corner because it's really hard to turn, to start the binding and turn at the same time. So don't put it in a corner, okay? And again, we want at least 5 to 6 inch of area to work with. That's more than enough, right? And so I'm going to place that right here where my starting, I put my starting clip right there. And now it's time for me to go ahead and pin this all the way around. Now, let me grab some pins or clips, whatever works for you. And I'm going to pin this all the way down, okay, all the way down to the corner, and I'm gonna stop. Don't try to pin the whole thing to the entire back. There will be some shifting, and especially around the corners, so there's really no need to pin the whole thing. Just pin to the corner, to each corner as you're working, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and pin. Now my binding is on, pinning again is on the back side. This is the right side of my quilt. This is where my exploding heart is. So this is the back of my quilt. And I'm just going to pin all the layers. So I have the quilt top in here, I have the batting, I have the backing, and the binding, okay. And I'm going to keep going all the way down. And I'm going to just keep pinning and keep pinning and keep pinning till I get to that corner. Now I'm almost to the end here. I'm right at the end at the corner. And now at this point I got another layer added to it, which is the quilt label. And so that's like 5 layers now. Yeah. I'm going to just keep going. And again, I'm keeping the edge of the binding to the edge of the quilt. And come all the way down. Now, at this point, I want to stop about 1/2 inch because that is my seam allowance. My seam allowance is 1/2 inch. If you're sewing this at 1/4 inch, then you want to stop at 1/4 inch. It just depends on what seam allowance you're using is going to determine where you stop at. I tend to like a little mini ruler, a sewing gauge or a quilter's sewing gauge, whatever one you have on hand. And I'm just double checking to make sure if I have any. And I want to put a pin 1/2 inch right before it stops, because that is my turning point. That's where my stitch should end. I'm going to come back in, repin that right there. And I'm just going to double check. 1/2 inch. Perfect. At this point, I'm going to turn it so it's easier. You want that corner should look like an L, okay? Like an upside down L. Instead of you keeping your binding going, you want to turn it going upward, okay? Turn it upward. Line some of this right here in the opposite direction, and it should look like this, okay? And it should sit right in that corner, wherever it naturally sits. And I can see my pen is coming too far, so it's not naturally turning. And I want to make sure it's that corner. You see that? My binding sits in that corner, and here is that nice and even straight line on an angle, and that is perfect. If you find that you need to hold a pin there, then do so, okay? But again, we want to sew all the way down. We're going to stop right at 1/2 inch, because I'm using 1/2 inch seam allowance right there. And then we're going to fold this back up, lift our needle, pivot, and turn this back down, okay? But it is right there. Let me double check to make sure it's right there. Yeah, it's right there. Let me shift this pen up a little. Once we have that in the sewing machine, and then we're going to come back and turn it down. Again, we're keeping all of these points even. So when we fold it back down, that fold should be even with the top as well, okay? And then we'll come back and pick up the stitches from here. You're going to have this little, feels like a little flap, a triangle flap. Once you stop right here where that pin is, 1/2 inch, while we're sewing, we're going to pivot over to the other side, okay? Meaning lifting up the needle without taking the quilt out of the machine and finding where that 1/2 inch is, and I can feel where that fabric starts at. I can feel where the fold is, and it's right there. Again, keeping that same seam allowance, and we're going to keep going all the way down. Now, the reason why I'm not going to pin is because, again, you might have some shifting coming down here. So that's why the pins are just to hold it in place as a holding place. But if it shifts, then I could just remove my pins and double check to make sure I'm not going past the 1/2 inch, okay, where that red pin is, okay. All right, so let's go ahead and take this to the sewing machine. Let's start at the very top. Remember, we want to leave 5 to 6 inches of a tail there for joining the other end. That's for later. But we're going to start sewing 1/2 inch seam allowance and coming all the way down. Some quilters prefer a much more smaller seam allowance. Remember, it's your quilt. You decide what it is that works for you. 1/2 inch is perfect for me. All right, so let's meet over at the sewing machine. All right, so here I have my quilt with the binding pinned in place, and I'm just getting started, okay? So again, I want to keep at least 5 to 6 inches of the starting part of the binding unpinned. We want to keep that free. So I'm going to start here where the red pin is. So I'm going to go ahead and get this underneath the foot. Get comfortable. If you find that you need your quilt gloves to help with the moving of the quilt, do so. If you find that you could use a mat, that helps glide the quilt. The bigger it is, the harder it is to manage. And so you want to make sure you're not causing a lot of stress in your wrist and in your shoulders, so take care of yourself. All right, with that being said, I wanted to go ahead and check my stitches. Make sure it's sewing at the center. I'm at a 3. That looks good. I'm using 1/2 inch, which is roughly the edge of my foot for me. And I'm going to go ahead and sew this down. And as I come to the pin, I'm going to go ahead and take out my pins. Now we may have some shifting as we're pinning as we're sewing the binding to the quilt. Just make sure you shift that downward. We may have to readjust our stopping point when we get to that area. And I do have some shifting. Look how that's starting to bubble. So that's quite normal. That's why I said that's why we don't pin the whole entire quilt, because of that. You see that? And I'm gonna just shift that on downward. Now, for me, where those stitches join together, I usually just go back over it just to make sure those stitches do not unravel. I've had too many binding I joint together and they seem to unravel right at that area. So I like to reinforce that area just to prevent the stitches from unraveling while we're working with the binding. And as you can see, look at that. We were quite aware that, hey, we may have some shifting happening. And it's okay, so I'm just repositioning everything. Now I'm going to grab my sewing gauge just to make sure I am stopping at the correct point, okay? All right, and we're getting close to that area. And I'm going to go ahead and take out these pins because I can tell that we just got to repin that. Now, as we get closer, again, I want to find that 1/2 inch, and I want to put my pin right there because that's where my stopping point is going to be. And I want to walk my sewing machine to that point, right up to that point. Ooh, right there. Ah, perfect. Okay, perfect. I want to stop right there. I want to gently just lift this up. And I'll turn my quilt in the direction which we're going. Now, like I showed you earlier, I'm just going to pull a little of this thread out so you can see that. I'm going to turn this going upward, okay? Upward, keeping that same angle. Now, I do recommend if you're going to do this, pull your machine out so you can see it, where you're going. And there's that perfect turn there, okay? Again, my tape ends here, right here, and it's right at that point. And as I'm folding it up, there's that perfect corner on the angle. All right. Now, once I've turned it, I want to measure down again, 1/2 inch from that end, so I can know where my starting point is at. And that one is right here, right here. So I'm gonna put a pin in it, okay? Actually, let me come back and repin that without the sewing gauge there. And then turn it back down. Again, that raw edge falling along the raw edge of the quilt, okay? And you'll notice that folded edge here is flush, even with the top edge of the raw edge of the quilt. Now, I can feel where that pin is. That pin is right there. Oh, right there. And I can feel that's where the fold of the fabric begins too. So right there. That's where I want to place my needle. So if I need to leave my pins in place, I'll gently push this back under. Get my machine lined up. Get the needle lined up at that perfect point. Right there. Pull out those needles. Ta-da! I have literally mitered my corner, turned the binding, and I'm ready to move along and sew along the other side. Now, it's up to you if you want to go ahead and start pinning this in place or if you just want to sew it down. For me, that's why I like pinning a binding in place. It's a lot of work, but you'll find that it will shift on you a lot. So I tend not to do a lot of pinning the binding to the quilt, okay? And now I'm ready to go ahead and sew this down. Now for my beginners, if you find that that's too much in one step and I need to just sew to that 1/2 inch, remove the quilt, do the flipping of the binding, come back and put it underneath the machine and start again, do that. Make it easy for yourself, okay? But for some of us who've been quilting for quite some time and we can keep that momentum going, go ahead, all right? But make it easy for you. And I'm gonna continue sewing this on. Alright, so we're coming to that corner again. So we're going to repeat those same steps, right? I'm going to use my red pen. I want to measure out along this side, okay? Where to stop, 1/2 inch, right there. So I'm measuring from here to here because I want to know where to stop at. Again, I'm measuring from this raw edge to here, going up towards the needle. This is where I'm going to stop at, okay? When I turn my binding, I'll be measuring from this side, okay? Okay? From here. But for now, I'm measuring from this side. When I turn it, I'll be measuring from there. From that side. Alright, so let's go ahead and sew all the way down, right to that 1/2 inch. And I can feel where that pin is. If I need to put a pin there just to have a holding place so I can remember, because I don't want to sew over the pin, I want to sew to the pin. One more stitch, just one more. Beautiful. Now I'm ready to pivot, okay? So, needle up. I'm going to gently turn the fabric. I want to get this ready. And if you notice, my hand is holding the quilt in place because I don't want it to thread. I don't want a really long piece of thread from the machine hanging out, okay? Because I'm still connected to it, right? So I want to go ahead and turn my tape so that it's on an angle. I want to make sure that it's perfect on that angle. Yeah, it's going up. Nice. 90 to, is that 90 degrees? No, that is not. So I'm not gonna say that. All right, so it's right there in place. All right, and so now I'm going to measure from the other side. Okay, and that's 1/2 inch again, right there. There's my 1/2 inch up. So I'm measuring from this side going down where I'm going. Okay, now that I'm ready to turn the binding back down, remember you're going to have a fold there. You're going to have a little fold there. I want to keep it even. It should be nice and flush right against the top. Again, if this is too much to do at the sewing machine, just cut it off. Take it to your cutting table so that you can get this turned correctly. Okay. Now I know where that needle is, the pin rather. I'm going to place it back underneath the machine. I can see right where that pin is. I can feel where that fold is. Oh, I'm not quite there yet. Right there. Ah, perfect. Take the pins out, and now I'm ready to begin sewing. And now I got that little, almost feel like a dog ear is sitting up, because when we wrap this around to the right side, it's going to fill that corner in perfectly. Okay? And I'm going to continue sewing all the way down. So far we have one side completely done. We have another side that's halfway done. And so we want to keep going, repeating these steps till we get to the end, all the way to the end. All right, as you can see, I just finished embroidering everything that I want on my quilt label. And so with embroidery stitches, you have a lot of jump stitches. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean this up, remove those, cut this down to size that I want, and fit it to the corner of the quilt that I would like to have it in. All right, so let's go ahead and clean her up and remove the hoop. Yeah, I wanted to pick a little bit more out of it. I could, but I don't want to take too much out of it because they do just provide some kind of stability to that area. I'm gonna just cut right into this a little bit, just a little, or tear away some of this. There we go. Beautiful. Okay. And maybe some of that second layer. The first layer is okay, but not as much as that second layer. Okay. All right, let's take a look at that. That looks beautiful. Really, really nice. Again, go back over it with a lint roller. And this is going to sit in the corner, something like this. So I'm definitely going to want to cut my fabric and get it ready. All right, now here's my quilt. And I want it to go in the corner on an angle so that the side seams fit right into the quilt. And I want to stay away from the edge. Don't want to bring it too close to where the bias tip is going to be. I'm liking that. Almost like a little pocket in the corner to this. And once I pin it down, I'm going to press it out. And if I wanted to fuse it, I can. But I'm going to hand sew this in place. Now I'm ready to cut this down. I'm just going to trim it off. And I can always come back to trim it down even more. Beautiful. So if I want to, I could top stitch this in place, which I think I'm going to do. However, I do want to make sure I'm matching the thread to the right side of the fabric. So I have black on that side, which is great. And I'm going to put a light gray at the top. A really light gray. Or I could use the same thread from the embroidery machine. Alright, so my quilt label has been pinned in place, and I decided just to go ahead and base it all the way around. So I want to base it around the top edge, and then I'm going to come back and base it around the cut quilted edge there. And then I can start adding my binding. So let's go ahead and sew this on. Now I could do this by hand, or I could do it by a sewing machine. It's really up to you. I just decided to do it by machine. And oh, I forgot to bring up the dog teeth. There we go. All right, that looks beautiful. So I'm gonna flip it on the other side so I can sew down and see the edge of the quilt here. And I may need to flip over my pins. Bring up the needle. Now I don't want to come too close into the seam allowance because where the binding is going to be, so be careful about that. Now I know that I have the gray thread at the top and the black thread at the bottom, but remember this stitch will be hidden, unlike this stitch here. This will be seen, so that's why we put that in black. But this stitch will not be seen, so we can go ahead and use the thread that we have, which is pretty nice, so that I can make sure that when I'm adding the binding, that is hidden. I'm going to go ahead and lengthen this stitch because it is a basic stitch in the length, and so I'm going to take that up to a 5. All right. All right, we have a based label along our quilt, and that looks amazing, amazing. So now I can trim this down and we are ready to apply our binding to our quilt. All right, So now that I have you here at the sewing machine and our two bindings have come together, and you want to make sure that they are stitched as closely together as much as possible. So I have a little gap there, so I can come back, probably put in about 3 or 4 more stitches, and I want to reinforce this area. Okay, so I'm gonna come back with the blue and really tug on that red and orange binding and see if I can get a few more stitches in here, because I really want them to be kissing each other. Okay, and I want to reinforce that as well. And I can feel where it's at. I want to get as close as I can. I want to back that up just a little. And if I have to take out a stitch or two, I can. But yeah, that's right on it. Okay, beautiful. And so they are literally kissing each other at this point. Okay. Now I want to cut this down because I don't need all of that bulk. Now at this point, I want to join these two together, literally. Bringing them together, I'm going to stick a pin between both of them so that it is flushed up against the quilt. And this pin is going to be my stitch line, okay? And so I'm just running it from one end to the other so that when I push the quilt out of my way, I'm just left with the pin where that straight stitch should be, where I'm getting ready to stitch at, to sew just the two bindings together. So I'm going to be joining the bindings, making sure that the quilt is out of the way. I am going to drop my stitches really small because I really want a small stitch here. So probably a 2. And yeah. And then I am going to stitch. And I started like in the center of my quilt, then I'm gonna back it up to reinforce it because I don't want that tail to be in this on that end. And then I'm gonna come back down again, so I'm reinforcing that. And I'm coming as close as I can to that quilt without stitching the quilt all the way down. And then I'm gonna come back and reinforce this again. Okay, beautiful. And there's that stitch right there. Okay, right there. All right, now we can trim that down, do all the cleanup that we need to do. Okay, trim it down, do all the cleanup. Okay, let's seam allowance on there. And now let's go ahead and flip all of this over. And now I want to go ahead and clean this up. Get rid of all those thread tails. Got a lot of them around here. Okay. So now what you're facing is the right side of the quilt. And I'm going to open this back up. Open that seam. I'm just finger pressing it. And now I'm going to turn the binding to the right side. You see that? To the right side. Beautiful. Again, get all those thread tails out the way. You should have quite a few of them right in that area. And I am going to go ahead and bring up my needle, and I'm going to start right there where the binding is. Uh-oh, I've lost my foot there. Let's see if I can get this back on. Without taking it apart, may have to. And then you can edit this part. Alright, so we're ready. And again, some people prefer to do this by hand. I prefer to do it by machine. I'm just going to go all the way around. All the way around. Again, I'm not pinning it. I just pin where the seam is, that where I joined them. And that is it. I'm going to take my stitches back up to a regular stitch, which is the 3. Okay. And we're just holding that binding in place, turning it over. Everything's getting covered. And so I'm just checking to make sure if there's any thread tails hanging as I'm going all the way down. But I want to make sure that where I'm sewing, I won't have any hiccups, okay? So I'm only sewing a small increment at a time, okay? A small increment at a time. Okay. And that's because of all the layers. There's 6 to 8 layers at this point. It's quite a bit. So I'm going to check these stitches, see how it look. Okay, that looks good. Let me lengthen that stitch because that's a lot right there. Again, as I go further down, I'm just cleaning up and putting another clip along the binding. Taking my time, so I'm just checking to make sure everything is clean at the same time as I'm sewing my binding. So I'm coming to that corner here. Again, this is a great time for me to do any cleaning up as I go along. And again, here's that corner. I'm just going to flip this over and back up. So it's going to sit like the corner of a box, okay? There's a thread there. And the first one I'm going to lay flat down is the one that I'm working on. So I want to make sure that this is completely flat all the way down to the end of the corner. Now, depending on your quilt, the thickness of your batting, you may need to trim that corner down just a little bit. Just the corner, not the binding. So you're just going to snip your quilt, okay? But if you don't need to, don't, because it just helps fill in that corner, okay? I'm going to keep going all the way down. Now I'm going to stop about right at the end, pin it, and then you'll notice that you have this little angle. And if you just come back onto the side that you get ready to turn to, which is this side here, and flip that up, it'll naturally form a beautiful mitered corner. And you can literally put pins in both ends to hold it in place until you get to that point, and we will pivot. I think I'm going to turn my pin this way, even though that's going to feel very awkward when I get down to it, but it's okay. Just want to keep everything pinned in place, okay? Beautiful. So I'm right there at that corner, and I'm just going to use my pin to help hold everything down. Take my time because I don't want to sew over pins. I'm coming to that corner, which is really nice, and I'm hoping that it lands, the needle, the sewing machine needle, lands right on that pivoting point. If not, it's okay. One more stitch. Beautiful. It landed right there. Now I want to leave the needle in. And I want to turn and pivot the fabric. So I'm going to gently turn. Take your time because you don't want to put any stress on the needle. Reposition your quilt. Get your binding. Bring your foot back down, and that looks good. And then we're just going to check again. Put our clips on. Take a few stitches so we can get started. And then come back and check again. Alright, so now that that's in place, I want to make sure that everything that I am getting ready to sew, this side of the quilt, is in my lap, and everything else is on the table and out of my way. Alright, this looks pretty good. Put my clip down. And again, we're just going to repeat this step for each side. We're just going to take our clips, reclip everything, and sew everything in place. I'm coming to that seam there, and it's really giving me a hard time. If you're ever putting scrappy binding together and you get to a point where the they join and it's fighting with you, you can always take a mallet or a hammer to it to kind of force those seams flat. Okay, sometimes that helps. And I'm going to take my time with this one and walk my machine over the seam here. And it's not liking that at all. Okay. Flip back down. Okay, but I made it over, so that's good. All right, beautiful. Just taking my time, especially in those bulky areas. I got another bulky seam coming here. I'm going to take my time and just walk it through. Let's put some clips on here so we can hold everything in place. Keep going till we get to the other side. Keep repeating these steps. Okay, so we come into that corner. You know, Tisha loves to put pins to hold everything in place in that corner. Take my time, walk it right up to that pivoting point where they come together. There we go. One more stitch. Beautiful. Lift up, turn it gently. Just take a few more stitches just to get it anchored in that corner. Lovely. All right, now it's time for us to reposition to the other side. This side seems to be behaving quite well. It doesn't need a lot of pins or clips and everything. So it's working in my favor. So I'm not using my clips at all. Just turning it. It's just, it's nice. Really easy for me. So that's nice. Again, I'm just cleaning up as I'm going along. You'll find that you'll be pulling threads for some time for cleaning up. So take your time. Just clean up as you go. It'll just make that task much easier and less work for you. To that corner, the next corner. So I'm going to gently just kind of readjust everything here. That's another seam there I just came across. Take my time with that. Right up to that point. Hadn't had a chance to turn it, but I'm just going to gently turn it and hold it down with a pin and come back and bring my needle right into it. Beautiful. Turn. I'm going to be gentle with this because I haven't gotten a stitch in there yet. Bring that back down. Beautiful. So I believe this is our third side. Yep. So we turn this, take our time. Well, this concludes how to add binding to your quilt. I know I had a lot of fun. It came out beautiful. Another finished quilt. See you in our next video.